things and sense. I think it follows from a lot of the things we've been talking about. So who'd like to begin?
I can read.
Good.
The relationship between things in the world and the work of art is marked by lack of transparency. We might, for instance, claim, as Whitehead does, that the world is composed of processes, not things, and that this, in turn, can be understood as events of becoming in which actual things are both objects and subjects. Things experienced are to be distinguished from our knowledge of them. So far as there is a dependence, the things pave the way for cognition rather than vice versa. Whitehead. In this painting by Gareth Cadwallader, a young woman looks down on a single fruit. In the background is the sea and the sky. Something is in the air. Thought, a feeling, something. Things are never just passive or inert. They have powers, by virtue of which they are able to affect things other than themselves. Stephen Shabiro.
This is a still life, Spanish still life from the mid 17th century.
Is that in the Prado?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've seen it.
Fabulous painting. It's so different from from Dutch still lives, which are more excessive. They're sparse and spaced.
Things encounter one another aesthetically and not just cognitively or practically. I always more of a thing than I actually know of it, and I feel it otherwise than I know it. Shabiro.
There's Morandi.
Finitude implies for Kant the limit of knowability, so there's no such things as absolute knowledge.
This is famous Magritte painting.
Beauty contributes nothing to cognition, Kant, but always precedes it. Within the work of Jean-Luc Nancy, finitude is not only exposure to the temporal disposition of one's existence, but also to the facticity of the world of other beings. Time is the substance I am made of. Time is a river that carries me away, but I am the river. It is a tiger that mangles me, but I am the tiger. It is a fire that consumes me, but I am the fire. August. The thing belongs to finitude, or rather, the finitude is the mode in which the thing is appropriated as a thing.
Did you read that again?
The thing belongs to finitude, or rather, the finitude is the mode in which the thing is appropriated as a thing.
The Dutch Still Life of 1628, Peter Klaas.
With Heidegger, human existence, Dasein, is essentially finite or directed towards death, but the sense of finitude is also the capacity to be affected by external objects that give rise to the temporal problem of the relationship between sensibility and understanding.
Can anyone unpick that a little bit more? Come back to it.
Yeah, I can
Go on, say something.
have the text back again.
Yeah, go back.
It's just that I'm reading the most interesting book, one of the most interesting books I've ever read in my life. It's I can't remember the name. I'll tell you in a minute. But it's written by a psychologist called Mark Solms, and they call him the Freud of the century. And in the book, he's sort of a cross between a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a neuroscientist. And reading about how the organs that sense things send the information to the brain, to the cortex and subcortical area. And a lot of this information is stored as images. And I'm just thinking with this, and they're talking about, I'm just starting a chapter about experience and how we experience things. And this thing that Heidegger says human experience is essentially finite. I guess the number of things we can sense or see or hear or interact with in this world are finite. And there are only so many, a spectrum of so many ways we can think or feel about things. So by definition, everything, we are bound by the edges of our experiences. So the coldest and the warmest, the biggest and the smallest. And so I can relate to that.
I mean, I think his reference to death, finitude. I mean, we have maybe this is maybe we can track that back to. I mean, Heidegger picks up on Kant and reworks him, and this concept of death. Maybe it's derived from, it's relating to talking to Freud's death instinct. Oh, death drive, sorry, which is basically the idea that the human state is just a temporary diversion between not existing on the way to death. Effectively, that's the it's just a temporary state, as it were. On the other hand, if I were to look at Deleuze, he would argue against this completely, would argue that death is not part of existence, but against existence. It's an interruption. And he would be much more creative about the existence. And finitude is pushing into existence, and would argue against both of these about death. And death is an interruption, which cannot be avoided, but is not part of, is different in kind to exist, to being. But they're all picking up on Kant.
Someone else read. Vanda, you got a good, fantastic reading voice.
Hang on a second. All philosophizing, being a human activity, is incomplete, finite, and restricted. Even philosophy, as knowledge of the whole, must be content and give up the idea of grasping the whole at a stroke. I can't, is it Heidegger? Yeah. Frida Kahlo, The Two Fridas, 1939. This section fluctuates between actual representations of buildings and the afterlife of art presenting buildings as subjects. Questions are thus raised how objects such as buildings withdraw from functional knowability but assume an afterlife based upon the way this withdrawal is staged.
Wolfgang Leib, the exhibition a year ago.
In this installation, City of Silence 2022, the sculptor Wolfgang Leib presents a series of models of archaic and historical architecture with the medium of beeswax. This work stages an afterlife of the original buildings as if they were always destined to have a double life, once within place and time, but then within the collective memory outside of any place. Looks like anyway, never mind. Frank Lloyd Wright had over 600 architectural projects left unrealized. This design was for the Gordon Strong automobile objective, and it represented a way of linking the automobile with the static architectural form. In a way, it represented a modernist conjunction of forms with an archaic reference to architectural syntax. Hiroshi Sugimoto was given a brief to photograph architectural landmarks, and instead of photographs which would depict actual buildings as documents, he instead attempted to capture a sense of the building in the imaginary stage, the vision before they became actual. The out-of-focus look presented the preconceptual image before becoming thing in the world.
Rachel Whiteread.
Rachel Whiteread constructed in concrete of an interior of an actual house within the location of its initial reality. Many saw it as a ghost of the original or even as a cast of life expended within the space. In this way, it was both a document of something but also a resemblance to the uncanny nature of that space. Wittgenstein built a remote cabin in Norway on the side of a fjord in 1914. The dwelling was designed for the possibility of thinking. In art, it is hard to say anything as good as saying nothing. Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Heidegger.
Martin Heidegger had a small house constructed on the side of an imposing landscape reflecting his desire for silence. Indeed, Heidegger stated that language is grounded in silence. Quote, to be a human being means to be on the earth as a mortal. It means to dwell. The old word bauen, which says that man is insofar as he dwells, this word bauen, however, also means at the same time to cherish and protect, to care for, specifically to till the soil, to cultivate the vine. Such building only takes care. It tends the growth that ripens into its fruit of its own accord. Martin Heidegger. Erwin Wurm created the installation of Narrow House 2010. Exaggeration leads to a heightened perception of the object of attention. It still exists as an image of a house, but once removed from its possible function. Cornelia Parker constructed a model house on the roof of MoMA based upon the house in Psycho. The actual construction is a facade reflecting the usual practice of presenting a film setting. This means that it simulates the imaginary view of an original that was an imaginary construction of a building functioning within a film set. Edward Hooper, or is that Hopper? depicted a number of houses. This one is titled Ryder's House, 1933, and provides the viewer with a heightened sense of remoteness and isolation within the landscape. The rendering of the house both relates to a real setting, but also captures a psychological portrait of place. Ian Keir presented this model of the endless house by Friedrich Keisler with an installation work. The work goes in search of the schematic imaginary, but offers a decentered and enigmatic response to the original. What we become witness to is a trace event pursuing the impossibility of being able to represent reality directly. Someone else want to read?
Well, Leicester.
Jonathan, can I just ask, could you maybe scroll through the images a little bit more slowly? I'm just sort of having trouble keeping up as I'm processing the end of the last sentence. It's like the image is already gone before we're on to the next one. Yeah, thank you.
That looks a bit like the Albert Hall, is what I was thinking.
Lester, do you know anything about that drawing?
I do, because I think I was the one who introduced you to it. It's from the 1920s, and it's a project. There's a planetarium designed inside of it, but then the idea is that you drive up, around, and outside of it. So it was an early precursor to Wright's designs for the Guggenheim Museum, which I all think in some ways derived from the helical steps in the Vatican. And I think I mentioned that, this is in Wright's own hand, but some of the later drawings of it, of the pencil sketches, I think were done by Richard Neutra, who was working for Wright at the time, who later became a well-known architect, Austrian emigre, and ended up settling in California.
So Sugimoto, a whole series of works which are all seemingly out of focus, great modernist architectural monuments, but all, as it were, in this state where it's almost like presenting the idea of schematism, where an object's just on the edge of becoming. It's still a vague image in the mind about to be named as such or come into the world.
And just as a point of background, so the image there is the Villa Savoie by Corbusier that was built in the 1920s on the outskirts of Paris. And it's considered one of the landmarks of modern architecture. So appropriate that he used it for this imagery.
Can you go back to that drawing, Jonathan, please?
Yeah.
One before it.
That one.
See whether this comes. That is the Concertone in Wellington, just outside of my flat. Is very similar. It's very circular.
But what you can't see on this drawing is there's ramps on the outside, and you drive your car up around the ramp, and you go up to the top of the building on those ramps.
It's like a beehive. It's like the Guggenheim, isn't it?
Well, it is, and it's one of the precursor ideas of it. So this has the ramps on the outside, whereas the Guggenheim does it the other way, and the whole building becomes the ramps.
The building in Mesopotamian building from the 10th century, which is a precursor of this sort of circular structure, which goes up. You walk up this ramp, you go from the ground to the sky. It's
and
built
I
on
think one of the sketches that Wright did on this project, I think somewhere is scribbled the word ziggurat. So I think probably had cognizance of what you're talking about.
Let me share just one more thing before we move on.
And what is that?
And that is called Beehive. It's a Parliament building in Wellington. It's very much like this drawing itself, isn't it? So I think that idea is actually applied in many buildings around the world. You can see something similar.
Yeah, I want to see this work.
Yes, I was working in the area when it was built. I thought it was just extraordinary. And you mentioned in the text the word uncanny, and it does have that uncanny feeling because you're just trying to work out, you know, the difference between the interior and the exterior and the whole, what did the building actually look like? Because I'd seen it before it got knocked down, but then completely forgotten. And all the locals were up in arms because there's a housing crisis and in Tower Hamlets, and people were saying, what on earth are they building this bloody rubbish for? And caused some real kind of interesting political fractious arguments. But yeah, it was amazing.
How long was it up for before it was taken down?
Sorry, didn't quite catch that.
Do you know how long it was up for before it was taken down?
I'd say about a year, but Jonathan, maybe you know.
It was what happened. It was there for the extension of a. It was given they granted a period for which it was up. Then there was appeal, and it went on through the. I think there was a court case around it, and they decided to knock it down anyway.
I'm really curious, is it a hollowed or is it like all being casted? Because it's huge.
It's sprayed plaster on the inside, so it's maybe 1 feet thick or something, enough to support the structure.
Yeah, because I think the only work that I see in person from Virtual White Thread is the one in Tate Modern. It's an upside down stairway. Maybe you can take a look as well.
Yeah.
But that one is like she molded just like what it is.
So
I like
exactly
the way.
indexicable. It's a kind of it's an index, but it's an absent index or
Yes.
not an index. So it makes you think about the lives of a building, the interior of a building. Wittgenstein. This is Heidegger's famous hut, where he wrote the last section of Being and Time. There's a book based on that building.
The narrow house reminds me of Giacometti's house, Giacometti's people or man shape. It's a house in Giacometti's narrowed human figure.
Erwin Wurm also has a fat house. Like it's like inflated house.
So could you just talk a little bit about this building?
Sure. It's the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. It was built for, I think it was a World's Fair or something like that. I think in around 1929, obviously in Barcelona. It was meant to be a temporary building, and it was demolished quickly thereafter. But again, it's one of the icons of modern architecture, and it was rebuilt painstakingly about 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And I think one of the things Mies van der Rohe had was an inherent sense of proportion and materiality. Just it's not something that you could academically define, but he had the feeling of it. And you could say his best works are not practical buildings, and so something like the National Gallery in Berlin, he puts the art gallery space in the basement, and on the ground level you have a wonderful pavilion along the lines of this, but bigger. So I actually have been here and had a gala dinner at one time here. It is a fabulous fabulous building, just to be in, just a fantastic experience.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Could you describe that feeling?
Well, I guess it's because it's such an icon to architects. I mean, I'm sure all part of that was wrapped up into it. So, you know, it might be a bit different if you came to it and didn't know the history of it. So, you know, I guess that gets overlaid with it. But the richness of materials is, and just the use of it is second to none, and the proportion of the space is exquisite. And it's a floating slab on what appear to be stainless steel cruciform columns. You can see them there. I mean, they're actually steel angle columns clad in stainless steel, but you know, you don't know that from just looking at them from the outside. And then walls of granite slabs and travertine and just sheets of glass, and then silk for some of the curtains, as I remember. And so very simple, and there's some sculptures as well. George Kolbe, if I remember his name right, and it's in one of the pools, which you don't see in this image here. And again, just the placement of the artwork is punctuation points in the architecture, I think works really, really well. It's not necessarily meant to show off the artwork, but it just the setting of it is great.
Lester, where is this?
Barcelona.
Okay, next time I'm there, I'll definitely have
It's worth a visit. Yeah, it got, as I say, it was reconstructed, so anybody can visit it now.
Yeah, I've been there too, and I just remember how fabulous the as you're saying, the surfaces of these materials are when you're up close. You know, they're just like infinitely patterned, and you know, you just get these great slabs of like reflected patterns of stones. Stone. It's really beautiful.
I've
Lester,
visited.
have you seen the photo collages and the drawings that he did in preparation for it? I just thought they were, when I think it was in this presentation, Jonathan then goes on to say about it kind of being conceived of as a series of images, and it's really interesting thinking about the relationship between those preparatory sketches and the finished product.
Yeah, I to be honest, I don't know that, but I mean, Mies van der Rohe wasn't really known for working by way of sketches. There'd be some preliminary drawings and things, but it was more just in his head and working it out and then reacting to drawings. But again, I don't know I don't recall the sequence you're talking about.
I also visited the Berlin New Museum. It is really good. And I also visited Mies building in Chicago. I don't remember the name of that building.
Well,
It's
there's
also,
several. I mean, there's a large office building downtown, which is a federal building, but then he's better known for the IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology.
yeah. That one in IIT. And it is just like, it looks in a distance like it's very short, and maybe it will give you a kind of like pressure feeling, but actually when you enter it, it's very like huge feeling. So it doesn't give you a stressful feeling, but you can see all the lights getting in, and the space inside is huge.
Yeah, the building you're talking about is Crown Hall, and it's it's the School of Architecture for IIT, and it's a fabulous building, and again, it's iconic and as a pavilion. But it's actually a terrible studio for the architects, but it's a beautiful building.
I think it's essential question, function versus form versus beauty versus practicality.
Well,
in a
and
lot
that's
of things
maybe
we do.
why, you know, and I've said this before, and Jonathan and I have discussed it, but I think that's why Mies van der Rohe is perhaps considered a great architect, because in a way he didn't care about the function of the building.
I think he did, and also using a mathematic way to build. I don't know, personally.
Maybe in a way that the highest realizations of the modernist ideal, more than what you find in fine art.
Mm.
Lovely.
In this painting by L.S. Lowry, The Old House, Grove Street, Salford, 1948, there is a remote, dreamlike quality in the portrayal of this urban scene. The house is both described through observation, but it also expresses a sense of dislocation from its setting, becoming instead an image of otherness. In this third section, there is a juxtaposition between the art of the filmmaker Robert Bresson and a series of statements about aesthetic theory. As an artist, his work concerns the play of finitude and sense, drawing the spectator into the deep reserve of interiority untouched by the demands of meaning. Images are rendered stark but pristine, assuming a life touched by autonomy of silent withdrawal. I ask my models to learn their lines not as a text that has meaning, but like something that makes no sense at all, like a sequence of syllables, like sentences that are made not of words but of syllables. I ask that the meaning come from them, from their own impulse, in the moment when I let them loose in the world of the film. Robert Bresson.
And the film stills that follow The Pickpocket and Mouchette.
I'd rather people feel a film before understanding it. Sorry, Jonathan.
You go. I'd rather people feel a film before understanding it.
Who say that?
That's Bresson.
Russell.
Bresson.
The work of art comes to face a paradoxical condition in which it passes through a condition of failure before it might exist. This condition is the consequence of a confrontation with finitude, that of not really knowing what the actual object of attention is and having the sense that there is a deeper level of oblivion, and this is constructed upon. Something then is always disappearing, and this might be said to be the root of the artist's work before any subject emerges.
This is from the film Mouchette. It's one of the most moving films I've ever seen, but it's unbearable. I mean, it really is the most difficult confrontation with a visual artifact I've ever experienced in my life. I can't see it again.
What's it called?
Mouchette is the name of a girl.
And who's it by?
Robert Bresson.
Thank you.
And why is it so troubling?
It's about a suicide and what leads up to a suicide. It's unbearable to watch it unfold moment after moment. You see it inevitably coming, but when it comes, it's so just distressing. It's really about abuse. She's a sort of orphan girl who has to look after mother's baby, and she's accused of being. She's very poor, and she's bullied, and she's raped, and I mean it's absolutely grim. But I mean it's grim because it's sort of so unremitting. It just doesn't let you. There's no easy way out of it. It just grips you. It takes you to a place where you prefer not to have gone.
Wow.
Aesthetics marks a place still unmarked by cognition. In turn, aesthetic judgments are blind because they are made without understanding, but they contain a feeling born out of immanence that underlie or make possible cognition. This factor leads Graham Harman to claim that aesthetics is at the root of all relations.
Mushet.
The work of art has a double character in that it is a thing that takes its place in the world, but it is also a speculation on what the thing is, and in this touches upon what is otherworldly. It is both precognitive and postcognitive in the way that it provides a schematic root for its own difference. This difference becomes manifest as a mode of non-knowledge.
Anyone got a commentary on that?
I was just going to say that, it's not necessary. I haven't said that that's necessarily true for all works of art. It would be, the ideal condition of a work of art. But being that kind of practice is such a difficult balance of research and the poetic and supposing to be a kind of form of proposal or presentation, I think that quite often works of art end up being less a kind of speculation, less active in the way that they are proposing a question, and actually end up being kind of a dead-ended or some other kind of dogmatic thing.
That's why often they historically fall away. So when we talk about the work of art, we're talking about enormous amounts of objects which just simply fall away, don't become placed within, don't find a context.
And that often occurs because of the attachment to the idea and the signifier, right? I mean, it's so bound to an immediate idea that it can't stay open for futures.
The work of art, oops.
Sorry, I'll go back.
Art has a double, oh, actually, we did this already, sorry. For Kant is an intuition of the imagination for which a concept can never be found adequate. There is an immediate excess of sensation that cannot be contained in thought. Beauty generates thought, but it cannot itself be thought, so it gives rise to a paradox. Do you believe in nothing? Sense in the work of Jean-Luc Nancy precedes the separation between the intelligible and the sensible, and as such is both before and in excess of signification. Sense is without substance, and it is born into presence, so is a becoming of something. Sense is that something that is always only coming, and once it is presented, then it disappears into nothingness. Sense is only sense when it comes to its limit.
Can I just, can you expand, Jonathan, on that last sentence? What does that mean?
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking the same.
Well, it is a limit experience. It doesn't fall into, it's not purely intelligible and it's not really sensible. So it's found at a limit of both conditions.
What?
So it doesn't fall into place.
Okay.
I feel it's like sense has a direction. So it's like something stimulate and it has a reaction to that stimulation. And when it doesn't have this kind of limit, the sense just disappear as like nothing or everything.
I sort of read that like this, it's always only coming, and once it's presented, then it disappears. It's the very coming into being that causes it to reach its limit, and when it reaches its limit, it appears, and its appearance is the thing that makes it disappear. So it can only be present and itself, which is sense, when it reaches that place of limit. It reminds me of working, because if you're looking right at it and going right toward it, then it's not an always only coming. It goes into some sort of mimesis of an idea and gets lost from the poetic.
I wonder if this sentence is written by Jean-Luc Nancy or is it written by you?
I can't remember. It's not I'm trying to announce it, it'd be a quote.
I think this idea of sense as being a limit comes from if you try and think of the cogito, if you go back to Descartes, he thinks of I think there I am, and then if you go deeper into that, if you look at what the I is, it's something that's detached from itself. You can't designate the I, and so you end up with a kind of the inner sense of something. However, in another sense, if you take the opposite point of view, and you think of something like the it of something, and that also there's also an example where that can't be designated, and now it becomes dispersed from the center at the edge. And I think this is what he's referring to. It's at the limit. It decenters the self. So sense becomes decentered and passes not inner sense, it's outer sense. It's kind of pushed out to the limit. And it's this who is talking, and you can't identify who it is. It's like saying when you say it rains, who's designated the sense who when you say it rains, it becomes an event, and at this point it becomes what is designated there as an event, and it becomes external, it becomes pushed to the limit. That's, I think, what this is. Maybe this is coming from, well, I've forgotten his name, another French philosopher, but this idea of the way language works, and the sense of language, in a sense, versus being pushed to the limit.
Merleau-Ponty?
I wasn't thinking of Ponty. I was thinking of God, it's gone. I think he wrote The Poetics of Space.
Bachelard.
It's written that what I just described is something Bachelard said, but I think others picked up on that, and that was like, what is sense? And that, I think, is trying to understand the event. Yeah.
The event is a paradox because it only happens for the first time. So it, in a sense, it designates something which just appears and then goes.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis would say this kind of aleatory point. You can't put your finger on it. It's where everything stops, where creation stops, where the cogito is this event, actually, for Deleuze. That's why the cogito is decentered.
Jonathan, I was wondering if I could ask about specifically about the poetic. I was thinking, in the case of Nancy and Blanchot, it seems like a really logical thing to move into the poetic, to kind of foster the finitude of that particular type of critical thinking. Let's say, what is the difference between the movement to the poetic in writing of someone like Jean-Luc Nancy and Blanchot, compared to when it's presented in their writing, compared to, let's say, the poetic of Paul Celan in the way that he presents his work, and then also, let's say, the poetics of language in the work of someone like Lawrence Weiner when it's presented in the context of installation art. What are the limits of those things, and how do they relate to each other?
So Blanchot is very much writing between. He says that poetry is the thing that undoes philosophy, is a power that undoes philosophy. So he's concerned with this relationship between the poetic and the philosophical as something which is partly its own undoing, or it's an in-between state. So when he writes his own novels, they're almost plain speech, whereas his writing essays are more almost close to the condition of poetry. They're evasive. They don't give don't give way to exact meaning. They're always built on paradoxes and evasions and slippages and the elsewhere of language, the sense of being exiled, language of being in exile. Paul Celan he attracts a writer like Blanchot, but is far more obscure. He lets language do work that can't be done in any other way. So it doesn't add up to meaning. It undoes meaning. To get to another sense of the world, an obscurity of the world, I'd say. His language is very sparse. It's enigmatic. It's almost stripped of poetry, broken down and dispersed. And then conceptual art, Lawrence Weiner. Again, this sparse, poetic. I mean, it's strange that generation of Weiner, Robert Barry, Joseph Kosuth, those analytical conceptual artists, in a way we were acting against formalism. So they wanted to find a condition whereby the work of art appears without, a support of decoration or elegance or visuality. So it's a kind of resistance to the visual in a way, and a manifestation of visual in another form. So the different conditions, really. I wouldn't say that Lawrence Weiner comes out of that tradition of the poetic. It's more like from concrete poetry or something. But there's a thesis there. If anyone is ambitious to do a PhD, there's a thesis in that relation between poetry and philosophy in the consideration of the aesthetic.
My movie is born first in my head, dies on paper, is resuscitated by the living persons and real objects I use, which are killed on film, but placed in a certain order and projected onto a screen, come to life again like flowers in water. Art is formed around a rhythmical constellation of sense that spaces offering and withdrawal. The play of allure and abyss are part of the manifestations of this within the reserve of non-identity.
These are the books that might be referred to. Shorter than usual.
I grabbed the Nancy's infinite finitude, because there's a moment here in the very beginning where he says that finitude haunts philosophy, and I was thinking about what Patrick had said about the sort of haunting, or wait, what was it? The comment about death. Anyway, and so that finitude in a way haunts philosophy and wants to put it in an existential situation, but that the Daisen, the being, the existence, means that doesn't happen. I don't know. I thought the idea of something haunting philosophy was really interesting.
Yeah, there's a wonderful lecture by Deleuze where he does a brief history of the infinite, and traces it from the Greeks to I guess all the way up to Husserl, but mostly via Kant, and then he goes on in the next lecture to discuss this idea of sense, and the death, and all of this is a lecture on he's actually pretending to be it's meant to be a lecture about Anti-Oedipus, and it's all founded on this objection to the idea of what death is, and that death is part of life, and that his claim is that they're different in kind. Anyway, it's actually a wonderful lecture, and he also talks about this this stuff I was talking about from Blanchot as well.
You know the name of the lecture or the paper?
Yeah, I can. Sorry, give me a minute. I'll put it in the chat. It's not very good at that. It's very instructive, actually.
Because Blanchot also said poetry is a power that undoes philosophy, and finitude is haunting it, and poetry is undoing it. So many things are attacking this, and it doesn't exist, and it died anyway, didn't it?
I mean, the bit that Deleuze is referring to with Blanchot, I think Blanchot was there's something called a book called The Work of Fire, which is about literature, and he compares this the linguistic idea of the inner sense of something to what is going on in Kafka. And in Kafka, he argues that the sense there's no I, there's no he, there's an invisible kind of there's another sense which dissolves, and he contrasts the two, and this is a different type of sense, which contradicts the standard linguistic sense, and Deleuze is interested in it because for him that is exactly the event, and that is exactly where the cogito is located, in exact opposition to where Descartes would have placed the cogito. Anyway, I think it's very interesting. Anyway, I'll find this lecture.
Meanwhile, has anyone got any thoughts, or are you any better off with the understanding of the cogito, with the finitude?
I was thinking about that one slide that you put up, and I think it was the first one where you said, can we just think about that? Has anyone got any comments? And it was something like death and finitude, and then moving on to the experience of objects, and then moving on to, I can't remember the last section, it's like in 3 sections.
Is that the sensibility and understanding at the end, I think?
Yes, yes, thank you. And I was just struggling a little bit with the idea of death and finitude, and then this relationship to objects, or experience of objects. I was struggling with trying to figure out, well, what is the connection there? Death and finitude, yeah, I get that, but where does this connect to experiencing of objects?
Withdrawal.
Well, can't you? Is that? Sorry, I don't know whether this is what Jonathan had in mind, but going back to paraphrase what Deleuze would say, is up to ancient philosophers, that is up to Kant's time, pre-Kant, were obsessed by the infinite, and they're very naive. They very naively represented as the infinite as creation. Well, and artists also were creating, and it was all based on the infinite, which basically is, you could summarize as God, or some God in some guise, or nature, but in Kant, when Kant came along, he stopped all that. He effectively put an end to it, because he introduced the idea of that the world was actually controlled by the finite, not the infinite, and that no longer was finite, infinite. The finite, and pushing beyond the finite was now everything. But at the same time, the relationship to the object and the subject completely changed. Now the object was controlled by the subject. The relationship to the subject, the object was completely different. Now there was this idea of the object. Everything became at the mercy, if you like, of the finite, and that is the being, or whatever. The finitude now dominated the world. And so I was thinking, you were thinking of objects in the way the perception of the object changes when finitude enters the fray.
Yes.
And that is instigated by Kant, of course.
And then the thesis of knowability comes in with Kant. So objects they can't be absolutely known or comprehend, and then you get out of that you get the whole idea of objects withdraw from the world. So we never get to know the object completely. So we get a subject bracketed by finitude and an object bracketed by finitude.
I think that moment that Patrick was describing was in one of the readings that you gave us, and it was really helpful to kind of put it on a philosophical timeline and see that pre-Kant, everyone was looking, so the earth is the object and the infinite is controlling the object. And then when Kant comes along and kills God, or says that we can't know if it's out there or not, so therefore for the purposes of this argument it doesn't exist, we can only experience that which we can experience, and that's from inside our human scope. It takes the gestalt and turns it on its head, and that moment is that moment of subject-object flip. And I think that being able to see it from that kind of like more overview reading that you gave us was really helpful to understand how that shift happened and why finitude becomes so important, because it also goes toward limit. It's the limit of sense, the limit of our capacity. If we are now I'm going to start to screw my object and subject up, but if we're the locus from which senses or a sense of the world is coming, then
So we've got a relationship between the subjects of perception and the objects of attention.
What he said. Yes.
Yeah, we move from this idea of everything is about creation to, I mean, now creation of the world, which is this idea of God or nature or something, to a world of what are the conditions of the world? What is the condition of the object? It's a quite different view of the object, right? It's all about what is the condition of existence, and then effectively what is the foundation of existence, and that's basically
is inquiring into how the subject comes to know, and under what conditions the subject knows, and the limits of what the subject knows. And this eventually leads him to the critique of judgment, which is a thesis about unknowability in a way, or non-knowledge. Something outside of cognition.
But is that unknowability also connected is that how Harman connects to the autonomy of objects?
Well, he is based on a critique of Kant.
Okay.
By Heidegger. And it's a critique of Heidegger as well. So it sort of doubles over. But his basic thesis is how objects withdraw. So a simple chair, you could say, is almost a noble object in that you can measure it, weigh it, designate the kind of wood and so on and so forth, style and origins and so forth. But in its use, it also withdraws, becomes something else. So it's a double thing. It both seems to be, a simple chair seems to be, there's not much which can be said about it. But when you inquire about it, it's like the still lives of Morandi. Why they're so fascinating is he returns again and again to these simple objects and poses the inability to grasp any. Let's let someone in. Late admissions. Any coherent sense of its, you don't come to a conclusion with Morandi. You just you remove more and more into a mysterious realm where the objects seem to be like ghosts or cadavers, or between here and nowhere, or
every.
But that's kind of interesting, because isn't that kind of what? So Kant effectively goes down this path of asking what of dismissing all this metaphysics that had gone before and saying it's nonsense, and that we need to base it on something firm, like what are the foundations of everything, and then attempts to do that, and then sneaks in at the back of this all these faculties, and there's some question about how could all these faculties work together, and he sneaks in this idea of some harmony between the faculties, which is effectively, he sneaks in God again. And everyone, and all the post-Kantians complain that he didn't follow his follow his I don't know what the word is. He didn't follow what we was doing to its completion. And then after that, everything becomes kind of mysterious because everyone's trying to find the genesis, or the philosophers after that are trying to find the genesis of where this came from, how these this cognition comes to be, how these how these conditions come about, and it becomes very mysterious because there's kind of a gap between the object and the subject, which has been opened up. And how do you fill it? How do you connect it? Kant didn't really answer this question. He doesn't really answer it. He doesn't give a genetic account of how things work. And there's a whole bunch of mystery then, like an absence kind of. How do you get from where he is to where we are? How do you get back to the object? If you take God out of the picture, if you take this magic away, and I think that's why he opens up aesthetics there. And in fact, in the third critique, that's exactly what he does. He kind of unravels his whole system in coming up with this aesthetics. He kind of unravels the whole thing, and then that's where kind of modern philosophy starts, from this understanding where it goes from there. I think it's quite interesting.
He discovered a gap. He came across a gap when he did the critique of judgment between the realm of freedom, which is moral law, and realm of necessity, which is nature. There was something which he couldn't account for. So his impulse to write the critique of judgment wasn't to do with the work of art, it was to do with this fundamental gap. And so he went in search of something which was mysterious, which couldn't be accounted for in terms of his first two critiques. Something broke down, something didn't cohere.
The realm of freedom and the realm of
necessity and the realm of freedom. Nature, necessity, and freedom is moral law. So the moral law within, the starry night above, and the moral law within is his epitaph.
So when he goes to look for this gap, that where these two things don't overlap, it's within that aesthetic that he finds aesthetics and stumbles upon art.
Well, it's when we're talking about beauty, or we're talking. So that's one point where he has the faculties function by themselves. Then suddenly they're not subject to some external law, and then they end up. Sorry, let me let the talking.
So in Kant, the beautiful and the sublime, the mountain, the range of mountains aren't sublime in themselves. But it's the perceiving subject in relationship to the object of attention, the starry night or the infinity or the storm. That it's the discord of imagination and the understanding, which is the sublimity, and the ability to overcome the terror of this confrontation.
Which is at the limit of imagination, too. That's what Nazi says, right?
It's imagination.
And it recoils.
The confrontation of the subject with this limit.
Yeah, so I think in that sense, I'm not sure his account satisfies everyone, but he opens up a whole bunch of possibilities that stimulate a whole host of different philosophies via this aesthetic idea.
Well, this is why in the 80s, a lot of philosophers such as Lyotard and Deleuze and Nancy turned to looking at Kant's aesthetic theory, particularly the sublime, to address things which they couldn't address within politics. They found something within Kant in aesthetic theory which could perhaps be a key to looking at the world, the political instrumentality. So it's a kind of standing off and standing back from the realm of politics.
I was wondering, Jonathan, if there might be an interesting relation to Death Fugue by Celan and the criticism of it.
Could you? I don't know it.
Death Fugue is I thought you would do, because it's one of his most famous ones. It's it's a poem which is about the Holocaust. It's about the experience of being in a concentration camp. I don't think he had. I think it was the experience of his parents.
Parents died.
And yeah, and I think some of the kind of anyway, it's a very like image rich and sometimes beautiful and rhythmic, but also very poignant and kind of ambiguous sometimes poem. And I think the criticism of it was exactly that it kind of had too much quality of the poetic to be talking about something which was kind of beyond comprehension.
We should be in Adorno stance. Have you got the poem on you? You got a copy?
Yeah.
You read it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'll just go find it. Hold on. Sorry. Here we go. Black milk of daybreak, we drink it at evening. We drink it at midday and morning, we drink it at night. We drink and we drink. We shovel a grave in the air where you won't lie too cramped. A man lives in a house, he plays with his vipers, he writes. When it grows dark to Deutschland, your golden hair, Margareta. He writes it and steps out of doors, and the stars are all sparkling. He whistles his hounds to stay close. He whistles his Jews into rows, has them shovel a grave in the ground. He commands us play for the dance. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink you at morning, and midday we drink you at evening. We drink and we drink. A man lives in a house. He plays with his vipers. He writes when it grows dark to Deutschland, your golden hair, Margareta. Your ashen hair, Shulamith, we shovel a grave in the air where you won't lie too cramped. He shouts, dig this earth deeper, you lot. There you others sing up and play. He grabs for the rod in his belt. He swings it, his eyes are so blue. Stick your spades deeper, you lot. You others play on for the dancing. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink you at midday and morning. We drink you at evening. We drink and we drink. A man lives in your house. Your Goldines, ha Margareta. Your Assines, ha Shulamith. He plays with his vipers. He shouts, play death more sweetly. This death is a master from Deutschland. He shouts, scrape your strings darker. You'll rise up as smoke to the sky. You'll then have a grave in the clouds where you won't lie too cramped. Black milk of daybreak, we drink you at night. We drink you at midday. Death is a master aus Deutschland. We drink you at evening and morning. We drink and we drink. This death is ein master aus Deutschland. And his eye is blue. He shouts you with shot made of lead shoots, you level and true. A man lives in the house, your Goldines, ha Margaret. He loosens his hounds on us, grants us a grave in the air. He plays with his vipers and daydreams. Der Tod ist ein Meister Ausland. And Goldines, ha Margaret. That's it.
That was used by Amazon Kiefer in a series of paintings. There's a very famous image decided black milk. Very interesting use of repetition.
Coming back to her hair too, because it seems to mean different things, Very
that play between Ashen and Golden.
Yeah, and the ashen sort of reminding us also that we're in the camp, and then they talk about the grave where it won't be too crowded. This idea of the different planes. Yeah, amazing.
Sam, did you say the person who wrote it, was it written at the, was the person in Auschwitz?
No, his parents were in Auschwitz.
Oh, okay.
He died in a concentration camp. He committed suicide when he was 50. I think he was working in Paris and he jumped into the Seine.
Yeah.
So he couldn't endure. He lived with it for a number of years and then he just couldn't take it anymore, apparently.
For this topic, it also reminds me of Nietzsche. Why you didn't mention him?
Well, you don't mention people directly in poetry.
Okay.
Critics do.
But I mean also for our presentation.
So I think Nancy was concerned that finitude would look like he was trying to keep it away from Nietzsche for that reason. He mentioned a couple of times in this infinite finitude section of Being and Sense, or the sense of the world, that that the idea of finitude wants to wander toward this existentialism or this, but that it doesn't. Finitude is the structure, essence of being and existence, and is therefore lacking in privation. And so privation would be the thing that takes it toward Nietzsche, I think. And Nancy tries to sort of carry us over into the fullness or wholeness that exists instead.
But isn't it also like when it gets to one extreme, it also appears to be another extreme?
Well, that's something at its limit. I think that's what Jonathan, maybe. Help, Anya, come on, man. Look, Jonathan should be in bed. Help him out.
I'm lost.
Oh no, I just read it. No, but this, say what you just said again, Shaja.
Because recently I'm reading Nietzsche's self-statement. I don't know, what is it called in, let me see.
You mean biography?
Yeah, biography, talking about himself. And this, like our topic and also talking about Kant really reminds me of his like finitude to the thing. He's talking about like his own life and the limitation with the disease that he has, and psychological and also physical sickness, and also in certain circumstances when he was young he really liked Wagner, but later when the things changed he hated. Patrick, did you say anything? I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Going back to this idea of death and finitude,
Yeah,
So,
Nietzsche
if I
also
think
talked a lot about this.
if I think of what's his name, Spinoza, obviously Spinoza's philosophy is about a single substance and then the absolute infinity, but within that we would be finite modes of existence. We're all finite modes of substance, and when we interact, and in our interactions, we have good and bad interactions. I don't know why, it's not quite the way he puts it. But basically, everything is about our power to, and everything we do should be kind of to experience good interactions and avoid bad and this power and this avoidance is actually what Nietzsche picks up on, and this puissance is coming from Spinoza, and so it seems to me that this finite modes and the power of existence is, and the death, and actually Nietzsche of course will kill God in this is Nietzsche, everything is power, and the doing what one being and also Spinoza being what's the word, worthy of the event, and survival, or being power. It's not power in the sense we mean. It's power, not in a bad sense. Power is kind of what we need. But power replaces the good. So power is what one is supposed to achieve, and one should avoid bad interactions because they will reduce one. And power is creativity, whatever, right? So I think in that sense, this event is coming. It goes back to the event, but that power is coming out of that event. Yeah, that was my comment. I think it does relate to finitude, but maybe not the way Nancy sees it, or the way Deleuze would say it.
Are there any other points or any other issues? Bresson is a marvelous. You've not seen any Bresson films, you should try to see one. Very sparse and very stripped back.
I was thinking that we should do a movie night here.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So
As
good.
I search Bresson, he is not being defined as any of the movement or style. That is very interesting as well.
Yeah, Bayes style, Bayes movements.
I was also thinking, you were talking about the Barcelona pavilion, and I was thinking of I forgot his name. What is it? I remember his surname. Wall. What's his first name? Jeff Wall. The Jeff Wall photograph of the Barcelona pavilion. You know the work of art. You know which one I'm talking about, Paul?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. It's so Jeff Wall, most of his photographs are in a light box. They're usually quite large, and he has a quite well-known piece where he takes a picture of the Barcelona pavilion. A lot of his work is kind of artificial reconstructions of events. Anyway, this particular image, which you can probably find it online quite easily, depict as the cleaners cleaning the window in the Barcelona pavilion. And I believe that this is somehow to do with finitude to me. I mean, it's really to show you the kind of maybe to do with the dirt on the window or the, you know, the streaks on the window, like of perfection somehow. I think it's quite an interesting piece.
I'll look for it.
I mean, I can find it. It's quite well known, so I can find it now if you like. It's oddly, that was the first time I ever saw the Barcelona pavilion when I saw that picture.
Sorry, Lester. Is the? I just looked at the link that you just said. Is the full film only 3 minutes?
Oh, sorry, I thought it was 3 hours 26. Oh, sorry, I misread it. It's a clip then. Sorry. When something seems too good to be true, it generally is.
But back on that film idea, we do have this projector that Fabiano used, and we can convert the back room into a cinema if you guys ever want to do a movie night. Like,
Oh, that would be so cool.
you guys could introduce the movie or what, you know what I mean? It would be really fun.
Can it be on weekend?
As you like.
We can get takeaways and
Totally. Yeah. And download it from you know, whatever, Art21 or wherever we can find it. Jonathan, would you make the trek if we watched a couple of films?
Yeah, I would make the trek.
Cool.
sofa.
Yeah, we have a sofa just for you.
So next week, musicality and writing, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yes, that's correct.
So could you just introduce what we're going to do next week?
So it's a radically alternate approach to writing, which I was just recently introduced to, and essentially it's writing through spontaneous singing. Before I tried it, I personally wouldn't believe that it would work for me. I find it quite difficult to write. So I didn't really believe that I would be able to just come up with a piece of writing spontaneously just by opening my mouth and letting words coming out in a song. And yet it actually worked, which was, you know, very surprising. And the writing was very different to how I normally write. It was very straightforward, really quite simple, but kind of, you know, it had something. So I'm actually going on a workshop this weekend with the woman who came up with this, you know, approach. So that's that will be my first in-person introduction to her. So I hope to be able to, you know, leverage some of the exercises maybe she goes through with us at the weekend, and see if we can, do something interesting in the group as a different approach to writing.
Good.
Sounds great.
So next week is writing workshops, and if that takes an hour and a bit, we'll have another backup. I'll come with a backup to supplement if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I'll see how it goes. But, you know, if people want to share something of